The morning air carried a crisp bite as Captain James Morrison stood at attention outside Kensington Palace. His polished boots reflected the early sunlight, and his ceremonial uniform sat perfectly on his broad shoulders. 28 years old, with sharp blue eyes and a jawline that seemed carved from stone, James had dedicated 6 years of his life to the Royal Guard. He was known among his peers for his unwavering discipline. It's his ability to remain motionless for hours, no matter what chaos unfolded around him. But today felt different. Something in the air made his skin prickle with an unfamiliar unease. Princess Charlotte, now 18 years old, was scheduled to attend a charity garden party on the palace grounds. James had been assigned as her primary guard for the event, a position he'd held many times before. Yet each time he saw her, his heart betrayed the stoic exterior he'd perfected over years of training. Their connection had begun 3 years ago during a winter storm. Charlotte, then just 15, had wandered into the guard quarters looking for shelter when she'd gotten separated from her attendants during a walk. James had been off duty, reading a book by the fireplace. She'd stumbled in, soaking wet and shivering. Her usual entourage, nowhere in sight. Instead of immediately alerting the other guards or treating her with the formal distance protocol demanded, James had simply handed her his jacket and made her tea. They'd talked for 20 minutes about everything except royalty. She told him about her love of painting, her frustration with constant scrutiny, and her dream of studying art history at university like a normal student. He'd shared stories about growing up in a small coastal town, his mother's garden, and why he'd joined the military when her attendants finally found her. Charlotte had looked back at him with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, James," she'd whispered, using his first name, though she'd never been told it. She'd seen his name tag. From that day forward, something unspoken existed between them. It was nothing improper, nothing that violated his duty or her position. Just stolen glances, brief smiles when no one was watching, and an understanding that, in another life, in another world, things might have been different. James shook himself from the memory as the palace doors opened. Charlotte emerged wearing a flowing lavender dress, her long brown hair pinned elegantly at the nape of her neck. She looked radiant, but James noticed immediately that something was wrong. Her skin held an unusual pallor, and she moved with less grace than normal, as if each step required extra effort. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. Hers seemed to plead with him, though for what, he couldn't say. Then her lady-in-waiting stepped between them, and the moment vanished. The garden party was held in the palace's rose garden, where 200 guests mingled among perfectly manicured hedges and flower beds bursting with late summer blooms. James took his position near the main pavilion, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd while remaining peripherally aware of Charlotte's location at all times. She moved through the guests with practiced ease, smiling and making conversation with diplomats, charity directors, and society members. But James could see the truth. Every 15 minutes, she would subtly press her hand against her lower abdomen, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly. Twice, she swayed slightly before catching herself. He wanted to break formation, to go to her and demand she sit down. But his training held him in place. He was a guard, nothing more. His feelings were irrelevant. An hour into the event, Charlotte was making her way toward the main pavilion where she was scheduled to give a brief speech, thanking the attendees for their charitable contributions. James watched her climb the 3 steps to the small stage, noting how she gripped the railing more tightly than necessary. She reached the microphone and began to speak. Her voice was steady at first, warm and sincere as she talked about the importance of the children's hospital the charity supported. James allowed himself a moment of relief. Perhaps he'd been overreacting. Perhaps she was simply tired. Then he saw it. A small spot of crimson had appeared on her lavender dress, just above her hip. As he watched in horror, it began to spread, slowly at first, then faster. Charlotte's voice wavered mid-sentence. Her hand moved to her side, and when she pulled it away, her fingers were stained red. Time seemed to slow. Charlotte looked down at her hand, her face draining of all color. She looked up, her eyes searching frantically across the crowd until they found James. Their gazes locked, And in that instant, he saw not a princess, but a terrified young woman. "James," she whispered into the microphone. His name barely audible, but unmistakable to those closest to the stage. Then her knees buckled, and she collapsed. The garden erupted into chaos. Guests screamed and surged forward. Other guards rushed toward the pavilion, but James was frozen. Every muscle in his body locked rigid even as his mind screamed at him to move, to run to her, to help. He'd been trained for countless scenarios. Active shooters, bomb threats, crowd control during riots, but no training had prepared him for watching the woman he secretly loved collapse and bleed while whispering his name. A full 3 seconds passed, an eternity in crisis time, before James's body obeyed his desperate commands. He broke formation and sprinted toward the pavilion, shoving through the crowd with none of his usual measured restraint. Other guards had reached Charlotte first and were already calling for medical assistance. But James pushed through them until he was kneeling beside her. Charlotte lay on her side, her lavender dress now stained dark with blood. Her eyes were open but unfocused, her breathing shallow and rapid. One of the guards was applying pressure to the wound on her side, while another barked orders into his radio. James reached for her hand, propriety and protocol forgotten. Her fingers were cold as ice as they wrapped weakly around his. "I'm here," he said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't contain. "I'm right here, Charlotte." Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her eyes struggled to focus on his face. James felt a wetness on his cheeks and realized he was crying, something he hadn't done since he was a child. Around them, the chaos intensified. Someone was screaming for a doctor. Guests were being herded away from the scene. In the distance, sirens began to wail. But in that moment, James's entire world had narrowed to the young woman bleeding in his arms and the horrifying realization that he might lose her before. He'd ever had the courage to tell her how he truly felt. The head of security, Colonel Richard Webb, appeared and immediately began issuing rapid-fire commands. "Ambulance is 2 minutes out. Keep pressure on that wound. Clear this area now. And someone get the Prince and Princess of Wales on the phone immediately."
Alan James
Barely registered the words. His focus remained entirely on Charlotte, whose grip on his hand was growing weaker. "Stay with me," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please, Charlotte, stay with me." Her eyelids fluttered, and for just a moment, clarity returned to her gaze. She looked directly at him, and her lips curved into the faintest smile. Then her eyes closed, and her hand went limp in his. "No," James breathed. No. Charlotte." A paramedic team rushed up the pavilion steps, and James was roughly pulled aside to make room. He stumbled backward, his hands and uniform front covered in her blood, and watched helplessly as they worked on her with urgent efficiency. An oxygen mask was placed over her face. 4 lines were established. Someone was cutting away her dress to better access the wound. Colonel Webb appeared at James's side, gripping his shoulder hard. "Morrison, I need you to step away now." But James couldn't move. His eyes remained fixed on Charlotte's too still form as the paramedics loaded her onto a stretcher. As they carried her past him toward the waiting ambulance, her hands slipped from beneath the blanket they'd covered her with and hung limply over the edge. Without thinking, James reached out and gently placed her hand back under the blanket, his fingers lingering for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. One of the paramedics shot him a look, but said nothing as they hurried on. The ambulance screamed away, its lights flashing against the palace walls. James stood frozen in place, staring at the blood-stained pavilion floor. Charlotte's whispered utterance of his name, echoing in his mind. In his 6 years as a royal guard, James had never broken protocol. He'd never let personal feelings interfere with his duty. But in those terrible seconds when Charlotte had collapsed, calling his name with her last conscious breath, everything he'd built his life around had shattered like glass. Colonel Webb's voice cut through his shock. "Morrison, my office. Now." As James followed his commanding officer through the palace corridors, he became aware of the stares from other staff members. Word had already spread. The princess had collapsed. She'd been bleeding, And in her final conscious moment, she'd called out not for her parents, not for her siblings, but for a guard. For him, James knew there would be questions, investigations, consequences. But none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was whether Charlotte would survive. And if she did, whether she would remember that in her moment of greatest terror, she had reached for him. Colonel Webb's office felt smaller than usual as James stood at attention, his uniform still bearing the rust-colored stains of Charlotte's blood. The colonel sat behind his mahogany desk, his weathered face unreadable as he studied the young captain before him. Behind the desk, a window overlooked the palace gardens, where just an hour ago, everything had fallen apart. The silence stretched between them until finally Webb spoke. "Sit down, Morrison." James remained standing. "Sir, I'd prefer to stand." That wasn't a request. "Captain," the steel in Webb's voice left no room for argument. James lowered himself into the chair, his spine rigid, hands clasped tightly in his lap to keep them from shaking. The adrenaline that had flooded his system during Charlotte's collapse was beginning to fade. Leaving behind a hollow exhaustion, Webb leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "How long have you been compromised?" The question hit James like a physical blow. "Sir, I don't understand what you mean by compromised. Don't insult my intelligence, Morrison. I've been doing this job for 30 years. I know what I saw out there today." Webb's eyes narrowed. "The princess collapsed and you froze. For 3 full seconds, you stood there like a statue while she bled. Then when you finally moved, you abandoned your post, shoved aside senior officers and held her hand like ... Webb paused, searching for words. "Like she was yours to hold." James's jaw tightened. "I was providing comfort to an injured member of the royal family, sir. She called your name, Morrison. Not help, not guard, but your Christian name. And you responded to it?" Webb leaned forward. "So I'll ask you again. How long have you been compromised?" The weight of the question pressed down on James's chest. He could lie, could claim he didn't know why Charlotte had called his name, that perhaps she was confused or delirious from blood loss. But what was the point? Everything was already unraveling. 3 years, sir," James said quietly. "Or maybe 3 minutes. I'm not entirely sure anymore." Webb's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, perhaps? Or maybe disappointment. "Explain," so James did. He told Webb about the winter afternoon when Charlotte had stumbled into the guard quarters, about the tea and the conversation that should never have happened. He explained how over the following years, their paths had crossed during his guard duties, how they'd developed an unspoken understanding. Brief words exchanged when protocol allowed. Smiles that lasted a heartbeat too long. Nothing physical, nothing improper, but something that had burrowed deep into his chest and refused to let go. "I never acted on it, sir," James finished, his voice rough. "I never violated protocol or compromised her safety. But I won't lie and say I don't care about her. I won't pretend that watching her collapse didn't tear something inside me." Webb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its edge. "You know what has to happen now?" "Yes, sir. I'll submit my resignation immediately." "It's not that simple, Morrison." Webb stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "The princess called your name in front of 200 witnesses. By tonight, every newspaper in the country will be speculating about the nature of your relationship with her. The palace will need to issue statements. There will be an investigation." James's stomach churned. "I understand, sir. But I want it on record that Princess Charlotte did nothing wrong. Whatever feelings exist, they're mine alone. She's been nothing but appropriate." "Noble of you," Webb said, though his tone suggested he didn't entirely believe it. "But if that were true, she wouldn't have called your name, would she?" Before James could respond, Webb's desk phone rang. The colonel answered it, his expression growing more serious with each passing second. "I see, yes, keep me informed." "Thank you." He hung up and turned to James. "Princess Charlotte is in surgery. Internal bleeding, cause still unknown. They won't know more for several hours." The room tilted slightly, and James gripped the arms of his chair. Is she going to survive? The doctors are cautiously optimistic, but it's serious. Webb returned to his desk and sat down heavily. Her parents are at the hospital now. Prince William specifically asked that you be kept away from the hospital and from the family. The word stung, though James had expected nothing less. Of course. The future king would want the guard who'd somehow captured his daughter's affection removed from the situation. It was the logical, necessary decision. I understand, sir, James managed. Webb studied him for another long moment before opening a drawer and pulling out a folder. There's something else you should know. The palace security team reviewed footage from the garden party. In the hour before Princess Charlotte collapsed, 3 individuals were observed behaving suspiciously near the refreshment tables. We're treating this as a possible poisoning. James's head snapped up. Someone tried to kill her? We don't know yet. But between the nature of the bleeding and the suspicious activity, we're not ruling anything out. Webb's expression hardened. Which means your personal feelings have become a security liability, Morrison. A guard who's emotionally compromised can't properly assess threats or make objective decisions. The truth of it was undeniable, and it made James feel sick. His feelings for Charlotte, the very thing that made him want to protect her more than anything, it actually made him less effective at doing so. When she'd collapsed, he hadn't immediately scanned for threats or secured the area. He'd simply frozen, paralyzed by fear. What are your orders, sir? James asked quietly. You're suspended pending investigation. Surrender your credentials and weapon. You're confined to quarters until further notice. Webb's tone softened slightly. I'm sorry, Morrison. I know this isn't easy, but it's necessary. James stood, removed his badge, and unholstered his sidearm, placing both on Webb's desk with steady hands, despite the chaos in his mind. As he turned to leave, Webb called after him. Morrison, for what it's worth, I believe you when you say you never acted improperly, and I believe you care about her safety above all else. Paused. But caring about someone and being able to protect them are sometimes 2 different things. Remember that. James nodded stiffly and left the office. Walking through the palace corridors that had become so familiar over the past 6 years, staff members he'd worked alongside averted their eyes as he passed. Word had spread fast. By tomorrow, his name would be in every tabloid, his face plastered across newspapers with headlines, speculating about a secret romance between a princess and her guard. He reached his quarters in the staff wing, closed the door behind him, finally allowing the carefully maintained composure to crack. He sank onto the edge of his bed and dropped his head into his hands. Charlotte's blood, still visible on his fingers. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. James, what's happening? The news is saying Princess Charlotte is in hospital. Are you all right? He couldn't bring himself to respond. What could he possibly say? Hours crawled by. James sat in the darkening room, unable to sleep, unable to think of anything except Charlotte lying on an operating table. He imagined her parents pacing hospital corridors, her younger siblings confused and frightened. He wondered if she was conscious yet, if she remembered collapsing, if she regretted saying his name. Near midnight, his phone rang. An unknown number. James hesitated before answering. Hello? Captain Morrison, this is Dr. Sarah Chen from St. Mary's Hospital. The woman's voice was professional but warm. I'm calling about Princess Charlotte. James's heart stopped. Is she? Is she alive? She's stable and out of surgery. She lost a significant amount of blood, but we were able to stop the internal bleeding. She's in recovery now. Relief flooded through James with such intensity that he had to brace himself against the wall. Thank God. What caused it? I'm not at liberty to discuss details, but I can tell you she's asking for you. Dr. Chen paused. Repeatedly. Even semi-conscious, your name is the first thing she says. Her family has been informed of this, and while they're not pleased, Princess Charlotte is quite insistent. Prince William has reluctantly agreed to allow one visit under supervision. James's mind reeled. I'm not sure that's appropriate, Doctor. I've been suspended. I'm aware of the situation, Captain. But my patient's recovery is my primary concern, and she's becoming agitated, asking for you. Agitation raises blood pressure, which she cannot afford right now. Dr. Chen's tone became firmer. I'm not asking about your employment status or palace politics. I'm asking if you'll come help my patient heal. James closed his eyes. Every rational part of his brain screamed that he should decline, that seeing Charlotte would only make everything more complicated, but the thought of her calling for him, frightened and in pain, shattered any remaining resistance. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, after ending the call. James changed out of his bloody uniform into civilian clothes, jeans, and a dark sweater. He signed out at the gate, ignoring the curious looks from the guards on duty, and caught a taxi to St. Mary's Hospital. The private ward where Charlotte was being treated had security everywhere. James recognized several royal protection officers who normally worked the palace detail. They watched him with cold professionalism as Dr. Chen appeared to escort him through. Before you go in, I need to prepare you, Dr. Chen said as they walked. Princess Charlotte is weak and in pain, though we have her on medication. She has a chest tube draining fluid in multiple forelines. It may be distressing to see. I understand, James said, though his hands were already trembling. Her father will be in the room. He's requested to supervise the visit. I've asked him to remain silent unless absolutely necessary for his daughter's well-being. Dr. Chen stopped outside a door marked with a security seal. Captain Morrison, whatever exists between you and Princess Charlotte, I need you to put her healing first. Can you do that? Always, James replied with absolute certainty. Dr. Chen nodded and opened the door. The room was dimly lit, machines beeping softly in the background. Charlotte lay in the hospital bed, looking impossibly small and fragile against the white sheets. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. Tubes and wires connected her to various machines, just as Dr. Chen had warned. Standing in the corner, arms crossed and expression thunderous, was Prince William. James froze in the doorway, meeting the future king's gaze. The hostility there was unmistakable, but so was something else. Fear. The fear of a father who'd nearly lost his child. Your Highness, James said quietly, bowing his head in respect. William said nothing, his jaw tight, but he gave a single curt nod. James approached the bed slowly, acutely aware of every eye on him. Charlotte's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. For a terrifying moment, he thought she was unconscious. Then her eyelids fluttered open, and those familiar brown eyes found his. James, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You came. Of course I came, he said, his voice rough with emotion. He wanted desperately to take her hand, but was hyper-aware of her father watching from the corner. How are you feeling? Like I've been stabbed? Charlotte attempted a weak smile. Which apparently isn't far from the truth. They think someone poisoned me with something that caused internal bleeding. James's blood ran cold. Do they know who? Not yet, her eyes filled with tears. I was so scared, James. All I could think about was you. I needed you to know. Charlotte Williams' voice cut across the room, sharp and warning. Charlotte's gaze shifted to her father, and something passed between them. A battle of wills. After a moment, William looked away first, his shoulders sagging slightly. Charlotte turned back to James. I needed you to know that whatever happens, these past 3 years have mattered to me. You've mattered to me. James felt his throat constrict. Behind him, he could sense Dr. Chen watching carefully, monitoring Charlotte's vital signs on the machines. You've mattered to me too, he said softly. More than I ever should have allowed. There are so many rules, Charlotte whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. So many expectations and protocols. But when I was bleeding, when I thought I might die, none of that seemed important anymore. The only thing I could think was that I'd never told you the truth. Charlotte, please, James said desperately. You need to rest. We can talk about this when you're better. What if there isn't time? Another tear fell. What if whoever did this tries again? Then I'll be there, James said fiercely, forgetting protocol, forgetting everything except the young woman in the hospital bed. I will always be there. I promise you. Behind him, Prince William made a sound somewhere between a growl and a sigh. That's enough, Captain Morrison. I think you should leave. James looked at Charlotte one more time, memorizing every detail of her face, knowing it might be the last time he was allowed this close. Get better, he told her. That's an order. Charlotte managed a real smile at that. Yes, Captain. As Dr. Chen escorted James from the room, he heard William's voice, low and strained, speaking to his daughter. Charlotte, we need to talk about this situation. No, Papa, Charlotte replied, her voice weak but determined. What we need to do is find out who tried to kill me. And when we do, I want James by my side. The door closed, cutting off whatever William said in response. James stood in the corridor, his heart pounding. Everything had changed in the space of a few hours. Charlotte had nearly died, and in doing so, had revealed feelings he'd convinced himself were one-sided. Now the entire world would know. The investigation would intensify. And somewhere out there, someone who'd tried to kill a princess was still free. James thought about Webb's words about caring for someone versus being able to protect them. But as he walked out of the hospital into the cold night air, he made himself a promise. He would find out who had hurt Charlotte, and he would make sure they never got close to her again. The morning newspapers were brutal. James sat in his quarters, surrounded by tabloids. His fellow guards had slipped under his door, each one more sensational than the last. Princess and the Guard. A secret romance? Screamed one headline above a blurry photo of James kneeling beside Charlotte at the garden party. Another showed him entering the hospital. Mystery guard visits poisoned princess in dead of night. The stories were a mixture of truth and wild speculation. Some painted him as a hero who'd rushed to save her. Others suggested he might somehow be involved in the poisoning. A few had already dug into his background, interviewing people from his hometown, former classmates. Anyone who might provide a quotable comment about the man had somehow captured a princess's heart. His phone had been ringing constantly since dawn. His mother, worried sick. His younger brother, shocked and confused. Former army buddies reaching out to offer support or ask what the hell was going on. James ignored them all. The only call he wanted wouldn't come. Charlotte was in a hospital bed, and even if she wanted to reach him, she couldn't. Not with her family watching, not with the entire palace in crisis mode. A sharp knock on the door made James look up. "Enter," he called, expecting another guard delivering more newspapers, or perhaps Colonel Webb summoning him for another interrogation. Instead, Prince William walked in. James shot to his feet immediately, his military training overriding his shock. "Your Highness, I wasn't expecting you." William closed the door behind him and studied James with an intensity that made the younger man want to stand even straighter. The prince looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes matching his daughter's. He'd probably been at the hospital all night. "Sit down, Captain Morrison," William said, taking the room's only chair himself, leaving James to perch on the edge of his bed. It was a subtle power move, and they both knew it. "Sir, if this is about last night, I apologize for any impropriety," James began, but William held up a hand. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here because my daughter is lying in a hospital bed, and when she's not sleeping, she's asking for you." William's voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. "Do you have any idea what it's like to watch your child nearly die, and then watch her reach for someone else? To realize that during what she thought were her last moments, you weren't the person she needed most?" The pain in William's voice was raw and genuine, and James felt his chest constrict with sympathy. "Your Highness, I never meant to cause you or your family any distress. If I could change what happened, I would. Would you?" William leaned forward. "Would you really change it? Because from where I'm sitting, you've been slowly inserting yourself into my daughter's life for 3 years. Tea in the guard quarters. Conversations that should never have happened. Looks that lasted too long. Tell me, Captain, was any of that an accident?" James met William's gaze steadily. "No, sir. None of it was an accident. But I also never acted inappropriately. I never touched her. Never suggested anything beyond friendship. The feelings I have are my burden alone. Clearly not. Given that she nearly said your name with what might have been her dying breath." William ran a hand through his hair. "Suddenly looking less like a future king?" and more like a tired father. The doctors confirmed it was poison. A rare toxin slipped into her tea at the garden party. If she'd consumed the full cup instead of just a few sips, she would have died within minutes. Horror washed over James. Do you know who did it? We have suspects. 3 servers who've worked various royal events over the past year, all with connections to an anti-monarchy group called the People's Voice. They want to abolish the royal family entirely. William's expression hardened. They targeted my daughter because they thought killing a beloved young princess would spark public outcry against the institution. But instead, it'll likely do the opposite, James said quietly. People will rally around her. Exactly. Which makes their attack both evil and stupid. William stood and walked to the small window overlooking the palace grounds. Charlotte is being discharged tomorrow. The doctors wanted to keep her longer, but there's too much risk of another attempt at the hospital. We're bringing her back to the palace, to the private family wing, where security can be absolute. James nodded, unsure why William was sharing all this with him. Unless the prince was about to ban him from the palace entirely, which seemed likely. She's asked that you be part of her security detail, William said, still looking out the window. She says she won't feel safe with anyone else. James's heart skipped. Sir, I'm suspended. And even if I weren't, my feelings for your daughter make me a liability. Colonel Webb was right about that. Colonel Webb is a good man and a fine security chief, but he doesn't have children. William turned to face James, and his expression had shifted to something complex. Fear, anger, reluctant respect, and perhaps understanding. I've spent my entire life in the public eye, Captain. I know what it's like to have every aspect of your life scrutinized and controlled. I know what it's like to love someone you're told you can't have. James thought of the stories about William and Catherine. How they'd broken up briefly under the pressure of royal life before finding their way back together. The prince would understand better than most. The complications of the heart when duty and protocol were involved. When I first met Catherine, my father's advisors told me she wasn't suitable, William continued. Wrong background, too common, would never be accepted. But I loved her, and eventually the world came to love her too. He paused. Charlotte is only 18. She has her entire life ahead of her. And you're a guard, not a prince or a duke, or even a minor noble. By every traditional standard, you're an impossible match. I know that, sir, James said quietly. I've always known it, but tradition didn't save my daughter yesterday. Protocol didn't protect her from poison. And all our ancient rules about who's suitable and who's not seem rather pointless when your child is bleeding out on a pavilion floor. William's voice cracked slightly before he regained control. So here's what's going to happen. You're being reinstated as of now. You'll be part of Charlotte's personal security team, reporting directly to me and Colonel Webb. But there are conditions. James straightened. I'm listening, sir. First, you will maintain absolute professional boundaries while on duty. No personal conversations, no lingering looks, nothing that could be photographed or misinterpreted. Charlotte's safety is the priority, not your feelings for her or hers for you. Understood. Second, there will be no physical relationship of any kind. Not until Charlotte is older, not until she's had time away from the trauma of nearly dying, and not until we're absolutely certain that what exists between you two is real and not just heightened emotion from a crisis. Of course, James agreed, though the idea of a physical relationship had never crossed his mind, or at least he'd never allowed himself to seriously consider it. Third, you will undergo additional psychological evaluation to ensure you can separate your personal feelings from your professional duties. If at any point the evaluators determine you're compromised, you're out. No discussion, no appeal. That's fair. And finally, William stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost threatening. If you ever hurt my daughter, if you break her heart or betray her trust or make her regret caring about you, I will personally ensure you never work in security again. Not for the royal family, not for anyone. Am I clear? Crystal clear, Your Highness, James replied, meeting William's fierce gaze without flinching. But I can promise you that the only way I would hurt Charlotte is if I thought staying away from her would keep her safer. Her well-being comes before my feelings. Always. Something in William's expression softened slightly. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, James shook it. The prince's grip was firm, a test of strength that James didn't try to win. "Charlotte doesn't know I'm here," William said, releasing James's hand. "As far as she's concerned, this was my decision alone. I'd like to keep it that way, of course, sir." William walked to the door but paused before opening it. "My daughter has good instincts about people, Captain Morrison. She's also stubborn as hell and doesn't like being told what she can or cannot do. Those qualities have made her difficult to raise but will serve her well as a future member of the royal family." He looked back at James. "You don't make me regret trusting her instincts about you." After William left, James sat in silence, trying to process what had just happened. He'd been expecting dismissal, disgrace, possibly even legal consequences. Instead, he'd been given a chance. A complicated, conditional, heavily scrutinized chance. But a chance nonetheless. His phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Webb. "Report to my office immediately. Reinstatement briefing." The next hour was a whirlwind of paperwork, security protocols, and warnings. Webb made it clear that James was on the thinnest ice imaginable. Any slip-up, any hint of impropriety, and he'd be gone. The psychological evaluation was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, James would shadow senior guards assigned to Charlotte's detail, learning the specific protocols for protecting her in the family wing. "The People's Voice group is still a threat," Webb explained, pulling up photos of the 3 suspects on his computer. "We've arrested the servers who delivered the poisoned tea, but they were low-level operatives. The real danger is the leadership. 3 individuals we've identified but can't locate. Marcus Trent, former military, dishonorably discharged. Sarah Hughes, political activist with a history of radical protests. And David Kellerman, a tech expert who's been helping them coordinate." James studied the faces. Trent looked ex-military, with a rigid posture, even in civilian clothes. Hughes had fierce eyes and a defiant expression. Kellerman seemed ordinary, almost forgettable, which probably made him the most dangerous. "They've gone underground since the attack," Webb continued, "but they will try again. The People's Voice has released a statement calling Charlotte a symbol of inherited privilege and claiming more actions will follow until the monarchy is dissolved." "How are we protecting her?" James asked. "The family wing is essentially a fortress. Limited access points, armed guards at every entrance, food and drink monitored and tested. Charlotte won't leave the wing for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. No public appearances, no visitors outside immediate family and approved staff." "She hate that," James said before he could stop himself. Webb raised an eyebrow. "You know her well enough to say that." James backtracked quickly. "I just mean that from what I've observed during guard duties, Princess Charlotte seems to value her independence." "Well, her independence nearly got her killed," Webb said bluntly. "She insisted on attending that garden party despite feeling unwell. Refused to cancel even when her laddie-in-waiting suggested it. She's young and thinks she's invincible like most 18-year-olds. Our job is to keep her alive until she develops better judgment." James wanted to defend Charlotte, but knew it would only prove Webb's point about him being compromised. So he simply nodded and continued reviewing the security protocols. That evening, James reported for his first shift outside the family wing. The corridors here were different from the public palace areas. Quieter, more personal, with family photos on the walls and less formal decor. James took his position at the entrance to Charlotte's private suite, partnered with an older guard named Thomas, who'd been with the royal family for 15 years. "She's resting," Thomas said quietly. "Doctor's orders. But she's been asking about you all day." James kept his expression neutral. "Has she?" "Look, Morrison, everyone knows what happened at the garden party, and everyone has an opinion about it." Thomas leaned against the wall, studying James. "My opinion is that if the princess trusts you, that's good enough for me. But you need to understand something. This family has been through hell. Diana's death, the constant media harassment, the weight of public expectation. They protect each other fiercely. You've somehow gotten inside that circle, which means you're part of it now. Don't betray that. I won't, James promised. Around 8 o'clock, the door to Charlotte's suite opened, and a nurse emerged, carrying a tray of medical supplies. She nodded to the guards and continued down the corridor. Moments later, the door opened again. Charlotte herself appeared. She was wearing comfortable clothes, soft sweater and loose pants, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked better than she had at the hospital, but still pale and fragile. Her hand pressed against her side, where the wound was healing. "Captain Morrison," she said formally, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "I didn't realize you'd been assigned to my detail." "As of this morning, Your Highness," James replied, maintaining the professional distance William had demanded. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been poisoned," Charlotte said with a wry smile. "But alive, which is better than the alternative." She glanced at Thomas, then back to James. "Could I have a word with you?" "In private." Thomas straightened. "Ma'am, protocol requires that you're never alone with a guard, even in your own suite." Charlotte's expression cooled slightly, taking on the regal quality she could summon when needed. "Thomas, I appreciate your dedication to protocol, but I nearly died 3 days ago, and I would like 5 minutes of conversation with Captain Morrison without an audience. I'm sure you can stand just inside the door where you can see us, but perhaps not hear every word." It was phrased as a request, but both guards recognized it as an order. Thomas looked at James, who gave him a small nod. They followed Charlotte into her suite, a spacious sitting room decorated in soft blues and creams. True to her word, Thomas positioned himself just inside the door, while James and Charlotte stood near the windows overlooking the palace gardens. "They told me what you did," Charlotte said quietly, her back to Thomas. "How you were suspended, questioned, nearly dismissed. I'm so sorry, James. This is all my fault." "None of this is your fault," James replied firmly. "Someone tried to kill you? That's on them, not you. But I said your name. In front of everyone? I might as well have announced my feelings over a loudspeaker. I've probably ruined your career." James glanced at Thomas, who was politely looking elsewhere, then lowered his voice. "Charlotte, when you collapsed, when I thought you might die, my career was the last thing on my mind. The only thing I cared about was whether you'd be okay." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "My father spoke to you, didn't he? He came to see you this morning, not at liberty to discuss private conversations with Prince William," James said carefully. "So he did." Charlotte smiled slightly. "He told me he was putting you on my security detail, but he was very insistent that it was strictly professional. He actually used the phrase "no funny business," which was mortifying." Despite the seriousness of the situation, James felt his lips twitch. "Your father has every right to set boundaries. You're his daughter, and you nearly died. And I know this is complicated." Charlotte moved closer, and James could smell the faint scent of her shampoo, something floral and light. "But James, when I was lying there bleeding, I wasn't scared of dying. I was scared of never seeing you again, of never telling you that the past 3 years, those little moments we've stolen, have been the only times I've felt like myself instead of Princess Charlotte." James's throat tightened. "You can't say things like that." "Why not? It's the truth." "Because your father has given me conditions for being here, and one of them is maintaining professional boundaries. And because you're 18, and you've just survived a traumatic experience, what you're feeling might not be real. It might just be your mind trying to process trauma by latching onto someone familiar." Charlotte stepped back as if he'd slapped her. "Don't do that. Don't diminish what I feel because of my age or because it's inconvenient." "I'm not trying to diminish anything," James said desperately. "I'm trying to protect you. From the media, from scrutiny, from making choices you might regret when you're older and have had time to really think about what a relationship with someone like me would mean for your life." "Someone like you?" Charlotte repeated, her voice bitter. "You mean someone common? Someone not worthy of a princess?" "That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean?" James struggled for words. "I meant someone whose presence in your life would make things harder. I'm not a prince, Charlotte. I can't offer you the life you deserve. I can't protect you from the press, or the judgment, or the scrutiny that would come from being with me. All I can offer you is ... me, and that's not enough." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but determined. "You're wrong, James. You're wrong about what I deserve and what's enough. But I can see you've made up your mind about this, at least for now." She walked to a small desk and pulled out a piece of paper, writing something quickly before folding it and pressing it into his hand. "Don't read this now. Read it later, when you're alone, and can really think about it." James wanted to refuse to maintain the boundaries he just insisted on, but the look in Charlotte's eyes stopped him. He tucked the folded paper into his pocket. "I should get back to my post," he said. "Yes, you should." Charlotte's smile was sad. "Thank you for coming back, James. Thank you for not disappearing completely." As James returned to his position outside her door, Thomas gave him a knowing look, but said nothing. Hours passed slowly. The only sounds the distant voices of other guards changing shifts and the soft chime of a clock marking midnight. When his shift finally ended and he returned to his quarters, James pulled out Charlotte's note. Her handwriting was elegant and precise, the letters flowing across the page. "James, I know you think you're protecting me by keeping your distance, but here's what you don't understand. I've spent my entire life being protected from everything. Protected from normal friendships, protected from normal experiences, protected from making my own choices and my own mistakes. The one thing no one has ever protected me from is loneliness, except you. When we talk, I'm not a princess. I'm just Charlotte. That's worth everything to me. I'm not asking you to make any promises or declarations. I'm just asking you to stop trying to make decisions for me. I'm 18, not 8. I know my own heart. And whether it takes months or years or a lifetime, I'll wait for you to trust that I know it. Yours, Charlotte." James read the note 3 times before folding it carefully and tucking it into the drawer of his bedside table. Outside his window, the palace gardens were dark and quiet. Somewhere in those gardens, Charlotte had nearly died. Somewhere in the city, the people who tried to kill her were planning their next move. And James Morrison, who joined the Royal Guard to serve and protect, has found himself caught between duty and devotion, between following orders and following his heart. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. He would keep Charlotte safe, even if it meant breaking his own heart to do it. 3 weeks had passed since the poisoning, and the palace had settled into a tense routine. Charlotte remained confined to the family wing, healing slowly but steadily. The wound in her side had closed, though she still moved carefully and tired easily. James had maintained his position on her security detail, following Prince William's conditions to the letter. Professional distance. No personal conversations beyond what duty required. No acknowledgement of the note she'd written him. Though he'd read it so many times, the paper was beginning to soften at the creases. It was killing him every day. He stood outside her door or accompanied her on short walks through the private gardens, watching her try to maintain her spirits while essentially being imprisoned for her own safety. She'd asked him once, casually, if he'd received her note. He'd simply nodded, and the flash of hurt in her eyes had stayed with him for days. But what could he say? That he'd memorized every word, that he carried it with him like a talisman, that would violate the boundaries he'd promised to maintain. The psychological evaluation had cleared him for duty. Though the therapist had noted that James showed signs of what she called protective attachment, he'd assured her it wouldn't interfere with his judgment. He'd lead. Every decision he made, every security protocol he suggested, was filtered through the single question of how it would best protect Charlotte. Webb was right. He was compromised. He just didn't care anymore. The break in the case came on a Tuesday morning. James was reviewing surveillance footage with Colonel Webb when an alert came through. Marcus Trent, one of the People's Voice leaders, had been spotted at a train station in Edinburgh. Local police had arrested him within minutes, and he was being transported to London for questioning. "This could be it," Webb said, his expression grim with satisfaction. "Trent was military. He'll know operational security. If we can crack him, we can find the others and shut down this threat permanently." James studied Trent's mugshot. The man looked defiant even in custody, his jaw set and eyes cold. "He won't talk," icily. "Then we make him an offer he can't refuse. Reduced sentence in exchange for information about Hughes and Kellerman." Webb closed the file. "Prince William wants updates hourly. This family won't rest until everyone involved in the attack is behind bars." That afternoon, James accompanied Charlotte on her daily walk through the private gardens. She'd been cleared for light exercise, and the fresh air helped her recovery. 2 other guards flanked them at a distance. Maintaining the security perimeter while giving the illusion of privacy, Charlotte walked slowly. One hand pressed unconsciously against her healing wound. She'd been quiet lately, withdrawn in a way that worried James more than he wanted to admit. The vibrant young woman who'd stumbled into the guard quarters 3 years ago, seeking tea and conversation, had been replaced by someone more careful, more guarded. "I caught one of them," James said quietly. Breaking the silence that had stretched between them, "Marcus Trent. He's in custody." Charlotte stopped walking, her hand tightening on the garden railing. "Will he tell you where the others are?" "We're working on it." "What if he doesn't? What if they try again?" Her voice was steady, but James could hear the underlying fear. "I can't live like this forever, James, trapped in this wing, afraid of every cup of tea. Wondering if today's the day someone succeeds in killing me." James moved closer, lowering his voice so the other guards couldn't hear. "You won't have to live like this forever. We'll find them. All of them. And we'll make sure they can never hurt you again. You can't promise that." Charlotte turned to face him, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "No one can promise that. My grandmother lived her entire life with the threat of assassination hanging over her. My father lives with it. That's the price of being royal. Being a target." "Then we make the target harder to hit," James said fiercely. "Better security, better protocols, better intelligence gathering. Whatever it takes." Charlotte laughed, but it was a broken sound. "You're doing it again. Trying to fix everything, trying to protect me from the world. But you can't, James. You're one person, and the world is very large and very dangerous. That doesn't mean I stop trying." "No, I suppose it doesn't." No. She wiped at her eyes impatiently. "Do you know what the worst part of all this is? It's not the fear or the pain or even the isolation. It's the distance between us. We're closer physically than we've ever been. You standing guard outside my door every day, but you feel 1,000,000 miles away. You read my note, didn't you? But you haven't said anything about it." James glanced at the other guards, who were politely looking elsewhere, but were certainly within earshot. "This isn't the place for that conversation. When will be the place? When will be the time?" Charlotte's voice rose slightly. "I nearly died, James. I faced my own mortality at 18 years old. And all I wanted was you. But now you're here, and you're not really here at all. You're just Captain Morrison, professional and distant, and following your precious protocols." "Please," James said desperately, aware that her raised voice had caught the attention of the other guards. "I'm trying to do what's best for you." "Oh." "You're trying to do what's easiest for you," Charlotte shot back. "Because admitting you have feelings for me means facing complications and consequences, and the possibility that loving someone isn't simple or safe or convenient." "I never said I loved you," James replied, the words coming out harsher than he'd intended. Charlotte flinched as if he'd struck her. "No, you didn't. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I imagined all of it." She turned away from him. "I'd like to go back inside now." James escorted her back to her suite in silence, hating himself with every step. The other guards exchanged glances but said nothing. As Charlotte disappeared into her rooms without a backward look, James resumed his post outside her door and tried to ignore the sick. Feeling in his stomach, he'd hurt her intentionally, to maintain distance, to keep boundaries, to protect them both from the impossible situation they'd found themselves in. But standing there in the empty corridor, James couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. That evening, Colonel Webb summoned James to a secure conference room where Prince William and several MI5 agents were gathered around a table covered with files and photographs. Marcus Trent had been questioned for 6 hours, and he'd finally broken. Hughes and Kellerman are holed up in a warehouse in Docklands, one of the agents explained, pointing to a map. They're planning another attempt. Trent says they've acquired a different poison, faster acting. They're targeting Princess Charlotte's 19th birthday celebration next month. Then we canceled the celebration, William said immediately. With respect. Your Highness, that's exactly what they want, the agent countered. They want to terrorize Princess Charlotte into hiding to make her afraid to appear in public. It undermines the monarchy's presence and plays into their narrative. I don't care about narratives, William snapped. I care about my daughter's safety. What if we use the celebration as bait? James heard himself saying. Everyone turned to look at him. Not the real celebration. A decoy. We announce Princess Charlotte will attend a pre-birthday event at a specific location. We make it look like she's there, but it's actually a setup. When Hughes and Kellerman make their move, we catch them. The MI5 agent looked intrigued. A double. Someone who looks like Princess Charlotte from a distance. It's dangerous, Webb said, but James could see him considering it. If something goes wrong, if they realize it's a trap, then we're ready for them, James insisted. Armed response teams, snipers, the whole package. We control the environment completely. It's the best chance we'll get to draw them out. William was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. Charlotte would hate being used as bait, even indirectly. She'd want to be there herself. Absolutely not, James said immediately. She's still recovering, and the risk is too high. I agree with Captain Morrison, Webb added. Princess Charlotte stays in the family wing under maximum security. The decoy operation happens with a trained agent who knows the risks. William nodded slowly. Set it up. But I want every detail vetted personally. And Morrison, you'll be lead on Charlotte's security during the operation? I need someone watching her who I know won't take their eyes off her for a second. The implication was clear. William knew about the argument in the garden. He knew James's feelings made him hypervigilant where Charlotte was concerned. In this case, that wasn't a weakness but an asset. The plan was set in motion over the next week. An agent named Sophie Davies, who bore a passing resemblance to Charlotte, was brought in and briefed. The decoy event would be a small charity luncheon at a hotel in Westminster. Intimate enough that Hughes and Kellerman might believe they could strike, but controlled. Enough that law enforcement could respond instantly, James. Spent his shifts preparing contingency plans for every possible scenario. If the operation went wrong, if somehow Hughes and Kellerman got past the perimeter, now, if they discovered the real Charlotte's location and targeted the palace instead, he worked 20-hour days, barely sleeping, running simulations in his mind until Webb finally ordered him to take a day off or be removed from duty. Charlotte still wasn't speaking to him beyond basic civility. When he was on duty outside her door, she stayed in her rooms. When other guards were assigned, she would sometimes emerge and ask them questions, make small talk. Anything to fill the silence that had grown between her and James. It was Thomas who finally confronted him about it. You're an idiot, you know that? The older guard said one night as they shared watch duty. That girl is in love with you, and you're pushing her away for what? Protocol? Duty? Some misguided notion that you're not good enough for her? It's not that simple, James replied. It's exactly that simple. Life is short, Morrison. Princess Charlotte learned that the hard way, and you're wasting time being noble when you should be honest. Her father gave me conditions, James said quietly. No relationship until we're sure it's real and not just trauma response. Until she's older and has had time to think about what it would mean. And you think ignoring her helps with that? You think pretending you don't care makes anything better? Thomas shook his head. I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've watched 3 generations of this family navigate love and duty and public scrutiny. You know what I've learned? The ones who have regrets aren't the ones who took chances on love. They're the ones who let it slip away. James thought about that conversation as he reviewed the operation plan for the 10th time. The decoy event was scheduled for tomorrow. Every detail had been checked and rechecked. Armed response teams were positioned. Snipers had clear lines of sight. MI5 had eyes on every entrance and exit. It should work perfectly. So why did James feel like something was about to go terribly wrong? He was in the security office reviewing final preparations when his phone rang. Charlotte's private number, one she'd given him weeks ago that he'd never called. His heart hammered as he answered. James, you need to come to my suite. Now it's important. Her voice was urgent but not frightened. James ran through the corridors, his mind racing through possibilities. Another threat? New intelligence? He burst through her door to find Charlotte standing by the window, fully dressed in dark jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back. What's wrong? James demanded. I know about the decoy operation, Charlotte said, turning to face him. I overheard my father talking to Webb. You're using someone who looks like me to draw out Hughes and Kellerman. James's stomach dropped. Charlotte, you shouldn't know about that. It's classified. I'm the target, James. I have a right to know when people are risking their lives to protect me. She moved closer. Sophie Davies. That's the agent's name, isn't it? She has a husband and a 5-year-old daughter. I looked her up. How did you... James stopped himself. Charlotte had resources, connections. Of course she'd found out. She's a trained agent. She knows the risks, does she? Does she really understand that Hughes and Kellerman have already proven they're willing to kill? That if something goes wrong, she might not go home to her daughter? Charlotte's eyes blazed. I won't let someone die in my place, James. I won't carry that weight. What are you saying? I'm saying I should be the one at that luncheon. It's me they want. Let me draw them out. Absolutely not, James said immediately. You're still recovering, and the risk is too high. Your father would never approve. My father doesn't have to know until it's done. Charlotte lifted her chin stubbornly. I've already arranged it with Sophie. She's agreed to stay here in my suite, while I take her place tomorrow. We're similar enough in build that if I wear her clothes and keep my head down, no one will notice the switch until it's too late. James felt panic rising in his chest. Charlotte, this is insane. You could be killed. Could be killed having tea in my own room. I could be killed taking a walk in the garden. Living in fear isn't living, James. Her voice softened. You asked me once what the worst part of all this was. I told you it was the distance between us. But I lied. The worst part is feeling helpless. Feeling like I'm just a chess piece being moved around while other people make decisions about my life and my safety and my future. Taking unnecessary risks isn't the solution. James argued desperately. Isn't it? You take risks every day. You became a soldier, then a royal guard. You put yourself in danger constantly to protect others. Why am I not allowed to do the same? Charlotte stepped closer until she was right in front of him. I need to do this, James. Not just for Sophie and her daughter, but for myself. I need to prove that I'm not going to spend my life cowering while other people fight my battles. James looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the frightened girl who'd whispered his name while bleeding, but the strong young woman she was becoming. She was right. He'd been trying to protect her from everything, including herself. But maybe what she needed wasn't protection. Maybe what she needed was trust. If I agree to this, and that's a massive if, there would be conditions, James said slowly. Full body armor under your clothes. Earpiece communication at all times. I'm by your side every second. Not as your guard, but as your partner in this operation. And at the first sign of real danger, you leave immediately. No arguments. Charlotte's face lit up. You're agreeing? I'm saying I'll consider it if we can make it work without your father finding out until it's over. Which seems impossible. James ran a hand through his hair. Charlotte, if anything happens to you, if they succeed where they failed before, ... double quotes, they won't, because you'll be there. She reached out and took his hand. The first physical contact they'd had since the hospital. I trust you, James. I've always trusted you. James looked down at their joined hands at the simple act that felt monumental after weeks of maintained distance. He thought about Thomas's words about regret, about Charlotte's note tucked in his bedside drawer, about all the things he'd wanted to say but hadn't because of duty and protocol and fear. Before we do this, before we take this risk, I need to tell you something, James said quietly. You asked me once if I loved you. I said I hadn't said that. But the truth is, I was too afraid to say it. Too afraid of what it meant, of how complicated it would make everything. But if we're walking into danger tomorrow, if there's a chance that... He stopped, swallowed hard. I do love you, Charlotte. I have for longer than I've wanted to admit. And whether we survive tomorrow or not, whether your father approves or the world approves or anyone approves, that truth isn't going to change. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Say it again. I love you, one more time. I love you, Charlotte. And I'm terrified of it, but I'm more terrified of losing you without ever telling you. She pulled him closer, rising on her toes until her forehead rested against his. They stayed like that, breathing the same air, hearts hammering against each other for a long moment. Then Charlotte whispered, Tomorrow, we catch the people who tried to kill me. And then we figure out how to build a life where I'm Princess Charlotte and you're Captain James Morrison. Somehow that's enough. It's more than enough, James replied. It's everything. The next morning, the operation proceeded as planned, with one crucial difference. James stood beside Charlotte, both of them wearing body armor under their formal clothes. As they entered the hotel for the decoy luncheon, Prince William didn't know. Colonel Webb didn't know. Only Thomas, who'd helped facilitate the switch, was aware of the truth. The luncheon room was set up perfectly, with armed agents disguised as waitstaff and hotel employees. Snipers had clear sight lines from neighboring buildings. MI5 had confirmation that Hughes and Kellerman were in the area, watching, waiting for their opportunity. Charlotte moved through the room with practiced grace, smiling and making small talk with the other attendees, all of whom were actually undercover agents. James stayed close, his eyes constantly scanning for threats, his hand never far from his concealed weapon. An hour passed. Then, too, James began to wonder if Hughes and Kellerman had somehow sensed the trap. Then his earpiece crackled to life. Contact. 2 suspects approaching from the service entrance. 1 male, 1 female, matching descriptions. Both showing signs of concealing weapons. Moving to intercept everyone down, James shouted, pushing Charlotte behind an overturned table as agents drew weapons, and chaos erupted in the room. Hughes and Kellerman burst through the doors, and for a horrifying moment, James saw the gun in Hughes's hand swing toward Charlotte. He moved without thinking, putting his body between the weapon and the woman he loved, bracing for impact. The shot never came. Armed response teams tackled both suspects before they could fire, wrestling them to the ground with brutal efficiency. Within seconds, it was over. Hughes and Kellerman were in custody, disarmed and subdued, while Charlotte remained safe behind the table with James shielding her. Stand down. Suspects secured. Someone shouted. James didn't move. He stayed crouched over Charlotte, his heart hammering, until he was absolutely certain the threat was neutralized. When he finally helped her to her feet, her eyes were wide but clear, her hands steady in his. We did it, she breathed. It's over. It's over, James confirmed. Prince William arrived at the hotel 30 minutes later. After being informed of both the successful operation and his daughter's unauthorized participation, his face was a storm of fury and relief as he swept Charlotte into a crushing hug, then turned that fury on James. You allowed this? You let her walk into a trap? I trusted her to make her own choice, James replied steadily. And I made sure she came home safe. William looked like he wanted to argue, to rage about protocols and safety and 100 other things. But then he saw how Charlotte was looking at James, and something in his expression shifted. Understanding, perhaps. Or maybe just acceptance of the inevitable. We're going to have a very long conversation about this, William said finally. All 3 of us. But first, let's get you both home. As they left the hotel, Charlotte's hand found James's and squeezed tight. Tomorrow would bring questions and consequences and complicated conversations about the future. But for now, they'd survived. Together, and that was enough.